This is a piece of racing history here in Daytona Beach. The last part of famed NASCAR mechanic Smokey Yunick's garage was gutted by fire tonight and is being called suspicious.
Picture the headline that keeps circulating online. Florida secretly bred thousands of snake-killing creatures and dumped them into the Everglades, unleashing some kind of biological weapon against the giant pythons swallowing the swamp whole. It sounds like the plot of a B-movie, the kind of story that gets clicks precisely because it sounds too strange to be fake. People laughed. People shared it anyway. But the real story buried underneath that viral claim is stranger, messier, and far more interesting than any manufactured army of killer critters. It involves robots shaped like rabbits, dogs trained to smell a snake through solid ground, traitor pythons wired with radio transmitters, and a genuine living creature that really is killing snakes from the inside out. Except almost nobody planned for it, and almost nobody controls it. So what actually happened in the Everglades, and how much of the viral version is true? To understand why Florida ever got compared to a mad science experiment, you have to go back to the exotic pet boom of the 1980s. Burmese pythons, native to the swamps and grasslands of Southeast Asia, became a status pet for reptile collectors captivated by their size and their strange, calm temperament. The trouble was simple physics. A hatchling that fits in your palm can grow into a 16-foot, 100-pound predator within a few years, and plenty of owners who bought a cute snake never planned for the adult it would become. Some pythons escaped. Others were deliberately released into canals and wetlands once they became unmanageable. Then, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida and destroyed a python breeding facility near the edge of the Everglades, scattering an unknown number of additional snakes directly into one of the most hospitable subtropical wetlands on the planet. The Everglades, it turned out, was practically designed for a Burmese python to thrive. Warm, wet, thick with cover, and packed with prey that had never evolved any defense against an ambush predator that can grow past 18 feet and strike from beneath water, brush, or leaf litter without warning. Worse, the python arrived with almost no natural enemy waiting for it. Alligators can occasionally kill and eat a smaller python, and a very large python can occasionally kill and eat a smaller alligator, but neither species functions as a reliable check on the other's population. There was no established predator, no competing constrictor, nothing standing between the python and total ecological dominance. The results showed up fast in the data. Researchers tracking mammal populations along the roads of Everglades National Park found declines that were almost impossible to believe. Raccoon sightings down by roughly 99%, opossum sightings down by a similarly staggering amount, and bobcats, foxes, and marsh rabbits either vanishing from large stretches of habitat or becoming exceedingly rare. In a targeted 2015 study, scientists released dozens of marsh rabbits fitted with tracking collars into python territory specifically to measure predation pressure, and within less than a year, pythons accounted for the overwhelming majority of rabbit deaths recorded. Deer numbers fell. Even alligators occasionally turned up as python prey. The snake wasn't just an unwelcome guest anymore. It had rewritten the entire food web from the top of the marsh down to the smallest rodent hiding in the sawgrass. Long before anyone talked about engineered creatures or biological weapons, Florida's actual first line of defense was remarkably old-fashioned. People with flashlights, machetes, and a paycheck. Independent hunters had been quietly pursuing pythons for years, capturing modest numbers without any coordinated government support. That changed in March of 2017, when the South Florida Water Management District launched the Python Elimination Program, hiring a select group of contracted hunters and paying them by the foot for every snake they removed from public land. The results were dramatic almost immediately. Within roughly a year, the program's most successful hunter, a man named Brian Hargrove, had personally caught and removed more than 110 pythons, and the district celebrated its 1,000th official capture with a python that measured over 11 feet. A parallel python action team, established around the same period, added more trappers and more territory to the effort. By 2019, the combined programs had pulled more than 3,600 pythons out of the wild, including a record-setting 18-foot, 4-inch female weighing close to 99 pounds, the largest ever documented at Big Cypress National Preserve. The state kept scaling the effort year after year. Florida now contracts roughly 50 qualified removal specialists who work public lands full-time, and hunters have seen their per-snake compensation rise substantially to make the grueling, often nocturnal work sustainable as a livelihood. An annual public event called the Florida Python Challenge invites everyday residents and out-of-state visitors to compete for cash prizes by locating and removing as many pythons as possible over a set number of days, turning invasive species removal into something between a hunting tournament and a tourist attraction. Even the snakes themselves have found an afterlife. A company called Inversa now processes removed python skins into leather goods, from wallets to boots to footballs, turning an ecological liability into a small supply chain. By 2025, wildlife officials confirmed Florida had logged its most successful year of python removal on record, with thousands of snakes pulled from the wetlands through the combined weight of contracted hunters, competition participants, and everyday citizens legally removing pythons from private land with permission. It's a genuinely massive human effort. But hunters alone were never going to solve a problem hiding across thousands of square miles of nearly impenetrable wetland, so Florida started building smarter tools. This is where the story starts sounding like something out of a novel, except every piece of it is documented and real. Because pythons are ambush predators that rely heavily on scent and movement to locate prey, researchers realized they could turn that instinct into a trap. Beginning around 2023 and expanding through 2025, wildlife agencies and university researchers began deploying solar-powered robotic rabbits into python habitat. These devices are built to move and give off heat signatures similar to a live marsh rabbit, one of the python's preferred meals, luring a hunting snake close enough to trigger a sensor and alert a nearby team. It sounds almost too strange to be true, but it reflects a genuine engineering response to a genuine problem. Pythons are so well camouflaged and so still for so much of the day that even trained humans walk right past them. So scientists built a decoy clever enough to make the snake reveal itself. Detection dogs represent another real and remarkably effective tool. Specially trained canines involved in programs like Python Patrol can detect the scent of a python hiding in dense brush far faster than a human search team, and their noses have helped locate snakes that would otherwise have gone completely unnoticed until they grew large enough to do serious damage. Meanwhile, helicopters equipped with infrared cameras sweep over remote sections of wetland, using heat signatures to spot pythons basking or moving through vegetation too thick to search on foot. Perhaps the strangest and most effective method of all is the Judas snake. Researchers capture male pythons during the winter breeding season, surgically implant small radio transmitters, and then release those same snakes back into the wild. Male pythons are driven to seek out breeding females. And because pythons often gather in loose aggregations during mating season, a single tagged male will frequently lead researchers directly to a cluster of untagged snakes, including reproductive females capable of laying between 50 and 100 eggs in a single clutch. Removing one high-value female during this window can prevent the addition of dozens of future pythons to the population. It's a betrayal built directly into the snake's own biology, and it has become one of the single most productive tools in the entire program. Compared to all of this documented, real-world engineering, the viral idea of a state agency secretly manufacturing thousands of custom snake-killing creatures in a lab and airdropping them into the swamp starts to look a lot less like reporting and a lot more like an internet legend built from a kernel of something true, dramatized past recognition. Here's where the story takes its strangest and most factually grounded turn, because there really is a creature quietly killing snakes from the inside out in Florida. It just isn't something the state manufactured or deliberately released, and it isn't only killing pythons. Its name is Raelietiella orientalis, commonly called snake lungworm, though it isn't technically a worm at all. It belongs to a bizarre group of parasitic crustaceans called pentastomes, worm-like creatures equipped with 4 small hooks that let them latch onto the tissue of a host's respiratory tract. In its native range across Asia and parts of Africa, this parasite lives inside the lungs of local snake species, feeding on blood and tissue, generally without causing catastrophic harm to hosts that evolved alongside it for countless generations. Burmese pythons carried it naturally, and when pythons entered the exotic pet trade and eventually the Everglades, the parasite came along for the ride, first documented in South Florida around 2012. The life cycle is almost cinematic in its complexity. An infected python sheds pentastome eggs in its waste. A cockroach or similar scavenging insect eats that waste and becomes an unwitting carrier. A frog or lizard eats the cockroach, absorbing the parasite's larval stage into its own tissue without apparent harm. Then a native Florida snake, hunting for an easy meal, eats that infected frog or lizard, and the pentastome migrates directly into the snake's lungs, where it matures, feeds on blood, and begins the cycle again. Because native North American snakes never evolved any resistance to this particular invader, the consequences can be far more severe than they are in the Burmese python's native lungs. Reptile lungs are simple, single-chambered structures with far less redundancy than mammalian lungs, and a heavy pentastome infection can trigger pneumonia, tissue damage, and outright respiratory failure. What makes this genuinely alarming to researchers isn't just that it exists, it's how fast it has moved. Confirmed cases have expanded from South Florida into roughly 20 counties across the state, reaching as far north as St. Johns County, hundreds of miles beyond the python's own established range. That geographic leap happens because the frogs, lizards, and insects serving as intermediate hosts move independently of the python population, sometimes hitching rides through the pet trade in shipments that have nothing to do with snakes at all. Scientists have documented infections in at least 17 or 18 native Florida snake species, including pygmy rattlesnakes, eastern indigo snakes, water snakes, and several non-venomous species that play important roles keeping rodent populations in check. Researchers monitoring pygmy rattlesnake populations in parts of the Everglades have observed troubling declines that may be connected, at least in part, to this parasite spread, though the full scope of its long-term impact is still being actively studied. Wildlife biologists have since organized a tracking initiative called the Snake Lungworm Alliance and Monitoring Project, encouraging members of the public who encounter a dead snake, especially one with small pale strands visible near the mouth, to report the sighting so researchers can map the parasite's advance in something close to real time. It is, quite literally, a creature spreading through Florida and killing snakes from the inside. It just wasn't unleashed on purpose. It isn't aimed exclusively at pythons, and instead of being celebrated as a secret weapon, it's treated by the scientists studying it as a genuine and growing conservation concern, because the same parasite quietly threatening pythons is just as capable of wiping out the very native snakes Florida is trying to protect. So does the viral claim hold up? Not in the way the headlines suggest. Nobody at any Florida agency bred thousands of snake-killing creatures in a lab and scattered them across the wetlands as a deliberate weapon. What actually happened is a patchwork of very different, very real strategies layered on top of each other over nearly a decade. Paid professional hunters working public land year-round. A public hunting competition that turns ordinary residents into part-time python trappers, robotic decoys engineered to exploit a predator's own hunting instincts against it, detection dogs trained to sniff out snakes hidden in dense brush, helicopters scanning for heat signatures from above, and traitor snakes, wired with transmitters that betray their own kind during the breeding season. Layered underneath all of that, entirely uninvited and largely unplanned, is a genuinely dangerous parasite that hitched a ride from Southeast Asia inside the very snakes that started this whole crisis, and it is now spreading through native wildlife with consequences nobody has fully mapped out yet. The truth, in other words, isn't a single dramatic weapon. It's an entire ecosystem under sustained, coordinated assault by nearly every tool modern wildlife management has available, running in parallel with an accidental biological threat that arrived by pure chance and now threatens to outlast every hunter, robot, and radio-tagged snake combined. Florida didn't need to invent a monster to fight the pythons. The real story was already strange enough without the exaggeration, built from marsh rabbits wired with sensors, dogs with extraordinary noses, traitor males chasing their own kind into ambush, and a near-invisible parasite spreading through swamp counties faster than most people even realized it existed. Which part of that story do you find harder to believe? That Florida built robotic rabbits to hunt giant snakes, or that the real snake-killing creature has been spreading through the state's wildlife this whole time without anyone deliberately setting it loose?